study on the issue may feel. Just a quick reminder of the process to get this team put together. We advertised and received 70 applications. We interviewed nearly 40 over 4 days by a panel of Goodyear employees and residents. We selected 21 with backgrounds that include a mother who was attending college with her son, a forensic pathologist who, by the way, is expecting and due any time, and she's been put on bed rest so she won't be here tonight, a former principal and other educators, retired military, police, and fire professionals, a sales representative, a social worker, marketing and communications business owner, several former state employees working in the legislative arena, internal auditor and public health officials, and another mother who's in the audience tonight who had a little son back in April. And our outside facilitator, Marty Roselle, was chosen to keep the process moving forward and conduct business from the citizens' point of view without undue influence from staff. Parameters that were set forth for the success of the committee to reach their objectives include the City Council not being involved or attending the meetings, but being invited to look at any of the meetings minutes on the website, and you were given periodic updates via email. We had, and I thank Larry Lang, the finance director, Paula Alardo, the communications manager, Harvey Krause, the community development director, and both chiefs in public safety, Mark Brown and Chief Gaylord, for they were all part of the presenting teams during the education phase, along with the cities of Scottsdale, Avondale, and Peoria, police and fire, to share where they've been and what they've learned and best practices and standards that we might want to use as benchmarks. The last 6 months, only Paula and I were in the meetings with the committee, and in the words of one of the committee members, Bob Shoup, who sent me a wonderful letter this last week about the work of the committee, he said, "I hope that we have been able to produce a worthwhile report acceptable to the community, that such a group even reached a fairly consistent level of consensus on such hot-button issues is a major accomplishment. It has truly been my privilege to work with the powerhouse group of citizens before you, and I personally thank each and every one of them for the hours and the devotion to the mission and the work of the committee." With this introduction, I now turn the podium over to the moderator for the presentation team, Marvin Fair.
Thank you, Jareen. Good evening, Council. My name is Marvin Fair, and as Jareen indicated, I'll facilitate tonight's presentation as well as the question and answer period following our presentation. As the name implies tonight, this represents a work in progress. We're still not complete. We anticipate having a few more meetings to clean up the final report and then come back to you and present our final findings and recommendations. We hope sometime during the month of January. Our report focuses on outcomes, and this was by design. We felt that the operational issues to implement some of our recommendations should fall in the direct hands of the city staff, namely the police chief and the fire staff and their management teams. Our committee had recognized the high capability of these individuals in particular, and we want to congratulate them and congratulate you for having such high caliber people assigned to our public safety programs. We want to go ahead and start by introducing the members in presentation order, and then once the presentations are complete, I'll come back and we'll run a question and answer period. First we have Wally Campbell, followed by Catherine Wallinger, Mike Goss, Alan Wallace, and Jeff Gregg. So I'll now turn it over to Wally Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor Kavanaugh and members of the City Council. It is such a pleasure to be here tonight as a representative of the City of Goodyear on this committee. When we all turned in our applications, we didn't know what to expect, and as it turned out, it was much more than what we had anticipated, but it was such a wonderful opportunity for us to be on the ground floor to try to set some policy in the public safety area for the city. When the mayor met with us on our first meeting, he gave us a charge to become educated on all aspects of the public safety, to consider future and current service level expectations, identify alternative funding resources, and understand the cost to the taxpayer and to the residents of Goodyear, and make policy recommendations to the City Council. Next, please. The citizens on the committee have varied backgrounds, and all of us complimented each other, and we took our charge very seriously. We worked very diligently, meeting 15 times over the last 12 months. We have invested, each of us, hundreds of hours in research. We've asked questions. We've researched documents. We've talked among ourselves. We've talked to leadership in the public safety arena. We had a Saturday field trip. We met at Fire Station 181 last week and actually met in a training room. We did ride-alongs, and I did a ride-along with fire and with the police department, and that was a real eye-opener as far as the citizen is concerned, for us to appreciate what each of those departments do on a daily basis to keep our city safe. We've had various subcommittee meetings. We've had numerous guest speakers, but I would be remiss if I did not thank publicly our facilitator, Dr. Marty Russell, for her support to our committee. I also want to thank Jareen Watson and Paula Yardrow, as well as Wanda Nelson and Jennifer Weber of city staff, who continually got the information we requested and researched for us and made our jobs much easier, because we were operating with so much of the unknown, and we still are in some areas, and it's just the way it is. We also want to thank Fire Chief Mark Galliard and his assistant Heather, Goodyear Police Chief Mark Brown and his assistant Susan Petty, for all of their assistance, because we asked how they did their jobs, why they did their jobs, who did it better, and we were able to listen to Avondale, Peoria, Scottsdale as well from their fire and police departments. You have to know that all of us feel very strongly about keeping Goodyear the best city we can keep. We want the best public safety policy. We want to be safe in everything we do. We want to have an aggressive fire department. We want to help partner with you in public safety, and we want to thank you for this important appointment to this committee. We will work with you no matter what the outcomes come from our committee. We want to thank you for your diligence in recognizing that public safety is an issue that every citizen of our city is interested in, and we thank you for giving us an opportunity to have our voices be heard. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My name is Catherine Wallinger, and as Wally and Jareen had stated, we had not only heard and absorbed lots of information, but we were able to take this information and use it and see it in action. We were able to have the opportunity and the privilege of going and observing the Goodyear Police Department, as well as the Emergency Operations Center here in Goodyear. We also were able to tour Fire Station 181. We took a one-day field trip to the Phoenix Regional Dispatch Center, which was amazingly informational, as well as take the opportunity to see the Phoenix Emergency Homeland Security Center. As Jareen has stated, the first 6 months of this process, we listened to many different presentations. We heard from the city staff during those 6 months. Here in Goodyear, we also heard from the city staffs as well as from Peoria and Scottsdale and Avondale during their presentations. We asked numerous questions and over and over and over again. We learned an incredible amount of information about public safety and about the public safety functions that are going on here in Goodyear, as well as in the various benchmark cities that we asked to compare and look at across the valley. We then took out and worked and broke out into small group sessions. We were looking and listing our issues and concerns, and we were coming up with suggestions in these small groups. And we then regrouped and refined as a large group and came together and put these issues in categories. We saw some that overlapped and some that aligned with each other. During that time, we determined and we defined what we saw were expectations of levels of service that we wanted here in Goodyear for the future as far as our public safety. And we then took that and all of those various different ideas, and we developed a viable set of recommendations. And as Jareen had stated, that half of the year, we were deliberate in our privacy at that time and not having police and fire staff present. We wanted to have our deliberations, our debates, our thoughts, and our final recommendations unencumbered by having those present. We then came to the recommendation categories, and they are the following, and there were 16 recommendations, and they fall into 3 different categories. First is general public safety, the second is police, and the third is fire and EMS. Our report will be looking at each of the different issue, and they will be framing, that issue will be framed for each recommendation. The recommendation will then be made, and then they will be followed by suggestions that we believe for implementation in the future. The first category is the general public safety, and those 4 issues within that category are keeping up with growth, having a results and accountability factor here for not only you, the mayor and city council, but also the city of Goodyear citizens, staff retention, as well as funding for all of the issues that we are suggesting. I will go ahead and now introduce Mike Goss, who will then go ahead and look at the first category, and he will issue and frame those recommendations and implementations. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. As Catherine said, my name is Mike Goss, and I will really start to get into the meat of our recommendations, starting off with keeping up with growth. The committee felt rather strongly that growth must pay for itself, that growth should not, the current city citizens should not be paying for a lot of the growth. One of the recommendations that we have is to include the capital, operating, and maintenance costs for Goodyear Police Department and all future development agreements. This is already done for fire, but this should also be done for the police department. And we would include in those development agreements both residential and commercial. It's generally the case that when development comes online, revenues are not available to immediately increase levels of service for public safety. When this happens, service for existing community may be diminished for whatever length of time it takes to accumulate the needed revenue and add necessary personnel, equipment, and facilities. The recruiting, hiring, and equipment acquisition process tends to create this problem, even when revenues are available. The city should strive to control and anticipate new development so that services for existing citizens are not diminished to accommodate future citizens. Second recommendation we have is to tie development agreements to the % of development completed rather than the specific time periods. For example, rather than the typical 2 or 3 year time period, change to a percentage of the development completed. If the development pace slows, the city profits from that. Next slide, please. The second recommendation that we have is in regards to the results and accountability. The committee felt strongly that we should establish measurable performance outcomes for police and fire. Some of the current measures are inappropriate, but are used because they provide a measurable or calculated standard. Examples are 911 calls answered, arrests, reports taken, etc. These measures do not highlight the actual outcome that citizens would like in the police and fire departments. The example that I'm going to use on this is in another city fire department, Phoenix Fire Department. For many years in the 90s, they attempted to lessen the child drownings in backyards. They kept looking at the response time it took for them to get on site. And much to their dismay, for years and years, it didn't have the impact, even though they improved their response times. So they came up with the idea of, let's try and prevent child drownings. And when they did that and focused on the outcome of prevention and began a public awareness campaign, that's when they saw the drop in drownings. I believe Phoenix had 0 drownings this past summer. A comparison of statistics from before and after the intervention is implemented should be the standard of measurement to determine success or failure of the outcome. The second recommendation, and that's tied to the outcome, as I just talked about, you have to measure whether something's a success or failure, is publicize and maintain the existing information network to implement evidence-based policy decisions. This shared data can be accessed by all stakeholders to implement evidence-based public policy decisions for the improved planning and delivery of services that are focused on needs. This would control costs by allowing comparisons and cross-analysis to take place in partnership developments to allow for early intervention in areas. For example, statistics on specific location and times of crime could be overlaid with social services, health department, and community services data to accelerate crime prevention. It would focus on user-specific needs by providing data in an easy-to-use and flexible format such as tables, charts, and maps. The next major recommendation we have is in the area of staff retention. Service from the police and fire departments enjoy a very high level of satisfaction currently from Goodyear citizenry. For example, the 2004 Citizen Satisfaction Survey rated both police and fire very high. Citizens have come to expect fast responses that may not be able to be maintained as the city grows. Increasingly, police patrol officers' time is nearly completely absorbed responding to calls. The lack of a training facility, loss of their shooting range, and ability to maintain appropriate levels of supervision and staffing may over time erode the current high morale. While the retention rate is very good currently and public safety staff are motivated, some are feeling overwhelmed as the city gets busier. The demand for experienced staff is faced by all cities throughout Maricopa County. Competition within a diminishing hire pool of new recruits and experienced staff will increase. Investments in training and development in the city should not be lost by turnover. So our recommendation is that we continue current efforts that hold high standards for job performance and competitive pay and benefits, strengthen the public safety recruitment and retention program that through market analysis will keep salaries, benefits, and training competitive with top cities. Consider a bonus system to reward employees who stay with the departments for a specified period of time, such as a minimum of 5 years. Increase the percentage available for longevity pay. And implement various morale booster events throughout the year. Finally, the last recommendation is funding. With a new mall approaching, baseball stadium coming, and future university, sufficient funding for public safety services is paramount in assuring service levels consistent with public expectations. While the general fund provides the bulk of funding, the availability of its resources to pay for public safety services is expected to compete with the needs of other city programs. Consequently, there is a need to identify other sources of funding which could be dedicated solely for police and protection. The committee supports, and I might add that there was a lot of discussion, and there are anti-tax folks on the committee and there are pro-tax folks on the committee, but there was a consensus that the addition of a public safety sales tax, as long as the revenues are only used for police and fire purposes, and if public safety funds currently in the budget are not supplanted, for example, the combined and dedicated public safety percentage of the city's general fund operating budget is not reduced. The city needs to determine the amount of tax that would generate enough funding to cover the long-range operating expenses. With that, I'm going to introduce Alan, and he will talk about specifically the police.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, thank you. As Mike said, my name is Alan Wallace. I'm going to talk about the police issues a little bit that we discussed. The first recommendation we have is regarding police facilities. A tour of the police department by the committee left most committee members with the impression that maintaining and providing adequate facilities for the police department was not a priority to the city of Goodyear. The police department and telecommunications division are in old buildings that don't provide adequate workspace, training space, storage space, or even adequate space to process and hold prisoners. There's no room in any of those facilities for future growth. And I can only imagine what impression this gives to the citizens of Goodyear when they have to come to the police department for any sort of business they need to conduct. Our recommendation is that the city make providing adequate police facilities a top priority. They need comfortable work areas, adequate storage, and future growth must be considered. The lease space that's in the current plan is a good stopgap measure, but it should not take the place of a adequate, well-planned, and dedicated police facility. We heard several times that the lack of bonding capacity was the cause and to blame for the lack of a decent police facilities. The last election should have helped that. However, whatever the funding source, the city must demonstrate to the employees of the police department that they are valued members of the city workforce by providing them with an adequate and appropriate place to work. The next recommendation we have is regarding police response times. The police respond to calls 24 hours a day. They classify these calls in priorities 1 through 4, with priority 1 being the most urgent calls. Currently, the department responds to 95% of the priority 1 calls in 11 minutes or less, with the average being 4 minutes. Priority 2 calls are also urgent, such as alarms, injury, accidents. The department responds to 95% of those calls in 15 minutes or less. Priority 3 and 4 calls are much less urgent. Their times are in the report. The committee sees these response times as exemplary. Our recommendation is to maintain the current response times for priority 1 and 2 calls and respond to priority 3 and 4 calls as appropriate for the call type and urgency. As growth occurs, maintaining response times will become more and more difficult. The knee-jerk response to this might be add more personnel. While we recognize that additional personnel will be needed with growth, we feel that that should not be the only method of maintaining response times. Innovative ways should be found. Several methods are outlined in the report, such as call-in reports or mail-in reports for low priority calls. If the public is educated as to what to expect and their expectations are met, their satisfaction will remain high. The next recommendation we have and a related issue is regarding available time. Police officers' time is taken up in three main ways: responding to called for services, administrative duties such as paperwork and going to court, and free patrol time. It is this free patrol time that gives an officer the opportunity to patrol neighborhoods, stop and talk to residents and business people, and to be generally visible within the community. It is also this patrol time that suffers when other duties increase. A Goodyear police officer has approximately 6 minutes per hour on average of free patrol time. That's 10% of his or her time. It is recommended nationally that an officer have about 30% of his or her time for free patrol. Free patrol time is a key component to community policing. We feel that the 30% goal would create a strong visibility for the police department within the community. Our recommendation is that the department increase patrol time to 15% in 2007 and meet the 30% goal by 2009. As with response times, this does not just mean adding personnel. Shifting some officers' duties to civilians or volunteers, using more streamlined reporting systems, and seeking alternatives to officers responding to low-priority calls are all suggested ways to improve response time, or to improve the free time. The next recommendation we have is on radio interoperability. The current radio system used by the Goodyear Police Department does not allow for police officers to directly communicate with other public safety agencies, including the Goodyear Fire Department. The current system is also at maximum capacity and will not support a future larger population. Some areas of the city are not adequately covered by this system. As you know, new communication systems are very expensive. Our recommendation is for the city to support and fund the Goodyear Police Department's approach to buy into or join an existing system. While this approach may require Goodyear to give up some direct control of that communication system, the model works in many other areas where there is a good management system in place. This seems to us to be the most cost-effective approach for Goodyear. And before I finish, just a thought about impact fees. While we've not studied as a committee the issue of impact fees, many of our committee members have watched the discussions and proposals. Many committee members are curious as to why the proposal is for an increase of about $40 for the police department and $451 increase for the fire department. Even though the fire department is a much more capital-intensive department, this seems to be very one-sided in view of the dire need for better police facilities. Thank you for your attention. Jeff Gray is going to talk about the fire EMS issues.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Again, my name is Jeff Gray, and I'm going to be concluding the presentation, at least the recommendations section of the presentation, with briefly going over the three recommendations related to fire and EMS. The group, like I said, has three specific recommendations in the area of fire and EMS services. And while we don't have specific recommendations as they pertain to response times directly, you'll find that the recommendations themselves all relate in one way or another to response times. Currently, as you may know, the city has 4 fire stations within the city of Goodyear, with 24 planned at build-out. In 2006 numbers, that's roughly about $3.2 million for each fire station and about $1.7 million in annual operating costs. Some of the numbers that we receive to pay for that, at least the amount of tax revenue coming in, would be roughly 1 Walmart or 3 Targets per year as far as tax revenue goes to fund $3.2 million or $1.7 million in operating costs. In looking at the number of total fire stations that build out throughout for 24 fire stations, the committee realized that it would be difficult to find the funds to pay for such a large number of fire stations within the city. As such, we looked at a number of alternatives to building the planned number of fire stations within the city of Goodyear. In looking at other comparable cities in size and the linear makeup of the city itself, as Goodyear is, we looked at Scottsdale and Peoria. And the committee realized that the number of planned, like I said, fire stations that the Goodyear's planning is high when compared to these cities. Scottsdale is, again, like I said, linear and has roughly 13 fire stations within their bounds, and Peoria has 7. One tool that we looked at to help offset the large number of fire stations within a particular community was fire sprinklers. Fire sprinklers allow the community to, again, keep the response times low, but provide an adequate level of service to its citizens with a lower number of fire stations. So the committee is recommending that we develop a strategy that will result in an ordinance to require sprinklers in all new residential construction. Some items in addition to that, though, were that the committee is recommending that a reduction in impact fees to help offset the cost to the homeowner or the builders themselves for the cost of installing the sprinkler systems. Also look at additional incentives to the builders themselves, including density bonuses, for example, or other flexibility design standards such as street design or other similar efforts. Another alternative to the number of full fire stations within the city is to look at the idea of using 2-person EMS crews to help offset the need to send out a full fire crew to EMS-related calls. We found that a majority of the calls that the fire department deals with are for EMS-related calls rather than fire calls. So the city should look at strategically locating EMS-related facilities throughout the city to respond to these calls directly rather than, again, rolling the full fire crew to a particular EMS-related emergency. Lastly, the group felt that public education was a vital component to any effort to improve public safety. As such, we are recommending the city initiate a public awareness campaign or citizens group working in conjunction with other groups throughout the community to focus on subjects such as public education and prevention-related efforts for the citizens of Goodyear. So with that concludes my remarks, and I'll turn it over.
I would like to conclude our presentation by stating that while some of our recommendations result in a cost savings to the city, other recommendations involve a commitment of additional funding. As an example, I want to go back to what Alan Wallace had indicated in terms of community policing, where we're recommending an increase from 10% to 30%. The numbers we looked at indicated that this would require the addition of perhaps 43 additional police officers in the department at a cost to the city of an additional $2.6 million. That's just one example. With that, I'd like the committee members to stand up and be recognized for their effort, if you would please. We don't have all of the committee members here this evening, as you were informed earlier. I want to thank you very much for all the time. I personally have enjoyed working with you and would like it to go on forever, but that's not never going to happen. With that, I'd like to open up the floor to questions that we can respond to.
Mark, before we do that, could each individual identify themselves? But
Sure.
half of them, but not all of them.
Tom, why don't we start with you on that end? Sean?
Sean King.
Wally?
Wally King.
Catherine?
Wallinger.
Mike?
Goss.
Alan?
Alan Wallace.
Jeff?
Jeff Grant.
Bob?
Bob Shue.
Andrea?
Andrea Goodman.
And Jennifer?
Could we give them a round of applause?
Of course, Mark here, and you'll all be back, I assume, in January, and get to see you again. But you wanted to facilitate this, Mark, so why don't you start facilitating?
Yes, sir. Are there any questions that, Councilman Scott?
First of all, thank you and your committee. That was really a fine presentation.
I have a couple of questions. I really, with the EMS system, I really appreciate your comments on utilizing smaller vehicles such as Type 2 ambulances, which are used elsewhere, with 2 men aboard instead of 4 or 5 men aboard. This is going to take care of most of your first aid calls, and 75% of your fire calls are first aid calls. That's really good insight that you came up with that. Question is, have you thought about, and if you haven't, you ought to, utilizing the private sector in combination with our fire department to minimize costs to the city?
Okay. Does anybody care to address that?
Thank you. I happen to have brought that subject matter up.
Wally, would you go to the mic?
Sorry, excuse me. I'm Wally Campbell. We did talk about that, Dr. Scott, and we haven't gotten into it enough yet. But that was something that we wanted to talk about, the private ambulance provider, the contract that goes out, perhaps but I'm not prepared to make a recommendation, but we need more time to study. Perhaps we'll have something to bring back in January, because there are some issues that we just didn't get in deep enough that we'd like to dig a little deeper, if y'all don't mind.
Thank you, Wally. Next question is, have you thought about transporting patients as well as treating them in the field, such as Phoenix Fire?
I can state that we definitely have not considered that point.
That's a revenue generator, and you might think about that in the future also.
Okay, I appreciate that. We will consider that. Councilwoman Holland?
Well, you guys did a really great job. You should be very proud of yourselves because we're proud of you. Just some comments. Because of all the hard work that you guys have done, some initiatives have already begun in our city based on some of the questions that you've asked, and I think that you should be very pleased about that. A couple have been, we talked to the fire department about some of the issues that were in your report. I've also seen the power of metrics, and I can tell you that that really works. People don't necessarily like to collect them because it always means more work for the people that are pulling them together or having to keep track of everything, but they really work. So please continue to encourage our staffs and our departments to keep some metrics, and I'm sure they're going to be working on that one. The communication thing to me has always been a really big issue because I'm fairly new on the council, and therefore when I found out about kind of the archaic approach that we were having to use to communicate, I was surprised at that. And I think that, again, your comments will help further those studies along on what we should be getting and what we should be doing. So thank you very much. Appreciate all the hard work.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilman Sousa?
I've been on this council for 8 years, and just want to tell you, we kind of are guided here by committees, and this is the first time that I've spoken this way. I have never experienced such professionalism, the cohesiveness that this committee had, the way you've held together to bring to this council your recommendation. And let me tell you, I agree wholeheartedly with what you have brought before us. And I will back you 100% to my ability to accomplish many of the things that you've asked us to do. We are faced with concerns about sprinklers in the homes. We were defeated, as you know, by our residents when we brought this up several years ago. But I still think that's an important factor that we should seriously consider. I wanted to ask you whether or not you determined whether or not the computers in the squad cars have helped out in response times or given more time to police to answer more serious calls.
We have been privy to a demo of the capabilities of the computers. It's a very, very handy tool, and the technology will only get better. we were very impressed with the capabilities, especially when we went down to Phoenix to look at the emergency centers and saw their computer operations. I mean, they give you so much data to the patrol officers and the firemen that are responding to calls. We would hope that the city stays on the forefront. I think the committee speaks for all the citizens of Goodyear in that we do want the city council to do everything in its power to maintain a strong, viable public safety program, and that includes both the police portion as well as the fire portion.
One more comment. I have been going through the community in the past 3 or 4 weeks and coming up with the same concerns from our residents that you bring through your committee. However, we did a survey several years ago that said 98% of the people who live in this community feel safe. And I might add that that was one of the questions that I asked in my tours to our residents. And the answer still was they felt very secure here. But I agree that with growth, we're going to have more police and fire. There's no question about that. And it's important to us to be abreast of that requirement. I want to again thank you very much for the committee, for the way you presented yourself in such a professional manner. You should pride yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Vice Mayor Cavalier?
Yes, I first want to thank you very much for the time and effort you're putting into this, because there's a lot of good material coming out of this, and it allows for a lot of new things that we hadn't thought of, and it also gives us some, it kind of, in my mind, generates questions that I'd like to ask you, or if you couldn't answer tonight, to at least work on in those areas that you're working on. But I do want to tell you all that we really appreciate what you're doing, and I share what Councilman Souza has stated. Your productivity and everything you've done in this committee is probably one of the better committee results of committee work that I've seen. Keep up the good work. We don't want this to go away, so continue in that direction. Now, to some specific questions. On patrol officer time, to increase that to 15%, we probably could use some help. I don't know how we would do that, because they spend a lot of time doing reports. I know they spend many hours sitting there doing these reports, and I was under the impression that new technology was coming out where they could do their reports while they were on patrol. That may or may not be so, but there are new technologies out there that have to do with that. And I just wondered if you had looked into that as a possibility of something for the future, that you can talk to your police.
We most definitely had researched that. While I myself could provide an answer, I think one of our committee members can do it a little better, so I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Marv. Thank you for asking those questions regarding the computers and technology. There are so many ways that we can look at the innovative approaches to enable our officers to increase that proactive policing time by looking at the software that they have. I was fortunate to be granted by Police Chief Brown a ride-along, and my officer and I spent 7 hours together. I had a list of questions that I interviewed each question, or each officer I came across. I interviewed the SWAT guys, the K-9 guys, and all of the guys in the squad room. And let me just tell you, first of all, the camaraderie and the passion that they have working together is amazing. They are one team. They look out for each other all the way. But over and over, I heard the same complaint, and that was that unfortunately the software systems that they have within their computers have a flaw in that, in which they are not able to go ahead and have the same capabilities in their car versus what's in the squad room. They are oftentimes having to do what is in their car on a preliminary basis and then go into the squad room and finish up. So in essence, there's a duplication in time there. There have been times when we have heard from Peoria Police Department that they have dictation systems. There are new technologies in which there are handheld pop pilots that can be done with all of the different notes and tabs that all of their call reporting systems have, and then they would be able to go and sync that to their computer in the squad room. There are also trios that have PDA capabilities, but they take time. There's also obviously some way you can talk with the software developer who has the software in the squad cars right now and ask, can we upgrade this? Is there a patch? Is there some way you can fix it? And over again, the officers were adamant in their time of their administrative time. And I'm sure that the officers that have been on the force for many years, I'm sure Police Chief Brown, I'm sure Commander McLaughlin will say that's always a common grouse from officers. But hearing it over and over again during my day and my ride-along, I have to say that there had to be some type of consensus amongst them, and seeing firsthand the inabilities for the officer to have the different tabs that they need in order to complete their call reporting in their car versus what's in the squad room. That, to me, is the deficiency. So, thank you.
Yeah, because the one thing that I noticed was in the communications I received from our residents, they don't seem to feel, and even though we keep assuring them that this is the safest community in the valley in which to live, residents feel they'd like to see more officers on the street, or they'd like to see the officers on the street more than they are. So I just brought this up as something maybe that if we're going to look at something, maybe that's something that you could bring us that might help if we look in that direction anyway. And then yes.
Oh, I might add that there are also some other venues as well. Many citizens want to report something, perhaps for insurance purposes. They require a police report number. And instead of involving a police officer, perhaps there could be a website access where they could input the information, obtain a number, and then it would be on report, perhaps followed up by either a police officer or someone who is not a sworn police officer.
Good. So I hope you make, and you will, I'm sure, make that recommendation to try to get this, to update some of our technology, and I think that will save us money in the long run. And I know we need more police officers, I know that, but it would also help to relieve that somewhat. And then the only other thing I wanted to add to that was public education. Education public. Anytime you're talking about education, you're talking to me. I'm a firm believer in getting as many people educated and talked to and bring into a group. Just you people in your group being in this committee has been an education in itself for each and every one of you. Just trading thoughts and ideas. But I would like to see us put in more formal education and build facilities for formal education within the city, so that within our city center, in fact, I'm working on that now, and I think that that's something that we really need to look at. We need the training for our city staff and officers and fire, and it would be a great place for public education to bring people in so that our public is educated and given the information they need that will help them when situations come up in questions, especially about things that come to their city council members about. We get emails about that probably could be answered if it was in a training or in an education program. So just a thought for the future, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you again very, very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
First of all, I want to thank the committee for their personal sacrifices. We know that it took time away from your families and your jobs, and you looked at this committee and you took it seriously, because I agree with the other council members, the outcome, the content that you have given us this evening really denotes that seriousness, and I really appreciate it. And one of the key things I felt is when we talked about the sprinklers, we did have an initiative that failed. And part of that was our fault, because we didn't go attack it in the right manner. And I see the committee really worked on this, where you tell the builder developer, there is something in it for you. If you do this, we'll do that for you. And the other thing you had talked about doing early on education with the public, so that you get the regular citizen that's going to vote on this initiative to back it. So I thought that was a real genuine conclusion and solution for maybe having this initiative pass the next time. Then I just had one other question. When the EMS goes out, what percentage of those visits result in them actually taking them to the hospital? Do we have a stat like that? Do they always, once the ambulance is sent out, does it always go to the hospital, or is it some of it? And I just think that would be maybe another observation that might be helpful.
In terms of the EMS service, what the percentage of transports are?
Transports, how many times they have to transfer somebody to the hospital. I just throw that out to you. But again, I want to thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have that statistic.
Well, I throw it out to them.
Take my two cents worth, but first of all, let me apologize for being late. Sometimes there are not many things that come before the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens, but unfortunately, a 5.5-year-old can get in the way of that at times. And so I made a stop at home on the way, and it was probably ill-advised, but she held me up. That said, I'll be brief, and I have some questions that I'm sure you can answer maybe next time when you're here, but some more specifics about the bonus system, or percentage available for longevity pay or morale boosters. I'd be interested in hearing some specifics about what you discussed at your committee. That seems like a very an idea that's probably got some legs on it that needs to be discussed here. I heard this during the presentation about making sure, and I forget which one of the gentlemen was talking about the public safety sales tax, but making sure that we spend it on public safety and we don't spend it on other things. Did you all see in other cities where they had a public safety sales tax, they were spending it on other things other than public safety? Okay.
No, that was not the case. We just wanted the assurance that any money raised would specifically go to those programs.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a risk that maybe some other policymakers hadn't seen in the valley, or that we were unaware of by then. I can't agree anymore with all of your recommendations are very sound. I was curious, is the 11 minutes 95% of the time an industry standard, or is that a community-based standard?
That's
for the police
the actual
department?
standard that
That we've.
That's the actual performance of this department.
Okay.
Their actual average time is 4 minutes of that, in that 95%. So
Okay.
it's very, very good response time.
Okay. So the average time is 4 minutes. Okay, I got you. Now I'm following that. So, yeah, it's definitely very good. Couldn't agree more with the patrol time. I made a bunch of marks as you were going through your presentation here. The technology, I heard that loud and clear, and hopefully all of us did. The last thing we want happening, especially when it comes to the radio operability and the communications. The last thing I want any one of our officers doing, or public safety personnel doing, is having to whip out a cell phone and see if they can dial a phone number while they're at somebody's front door in an ever-changing environment. And so if that's something that needs immediate attention, I'd be willing to hear that, especially given the fact that maybe our bonding capacity has increased given the state statute change. So that's a conversation. The last thing I want to hear is, we got a new house in a shadow area down in Astoria Mountain Ranch, and an officer's pulled up to it, and the call was far different than the situation that you were faced with, and he or she is out there alone. So that's an expenditure I think that's definitely worth making. As well as the impact fee discussion was well received. Interesting, the new light on the sprinkler, and I think and then lastly, the two things. The use of non-sworn personnel, I definitely encourage. I think it's, whether it's traffic at events or, some of these simple reporting mechanisms, whether that's on the fire side or police side, I definitely would encourage. And then lastly, not only in police, back to the technology, not only is police, public safety, fire going to be experiencing the technology, but I think as we grow, we're going to be experiencing a big technology shift in the city as it relates to specific products, specific ideas, and specific measures that we need to take as in terms of departments. The police department might need something different than the fire department, yet we need the two to talk to one another. And so there's going to be a need, not only, I would envision, a need not only for technology in the hard capital sense, but I think technology in the mind sense, in the sense that there needs to be translators. And I used this example in a meeting with the mayor and Councilman Sousa not too long ago, in the sense that just like somebody translates Spanish for me or French for me when I'm talking English, we need somebody in the departments that may, technology specialists, almost a sales group that might work within the city that goes out and finds out what the needs of each specific department are as we grow. Sorry to give Jack Blonsky nightmares tonight, but I think it's a reality of something we're going to face as we grow, because planning needs, the CAD systems, everything as we're going back and forth. We can't just rely on one proprietary system, nor do we, but definitely think it's something that's a larger issue than just public safety. Thank you very much for your dedicated time. I know it sounds like you all have put in a lot of extra hours. Oftentimes these committees can grow into animals that we didn't expect them to be, and it sounds like you've all been very dedicated to it, and I appreciate the time.
Mayor Kavanaugh, did you have any questions?
Yes, I have a comment, no questions. Do you have anything else you'd like?
No, we just wanted to thank you very much for your time. We look forward to presenting to you next month our final report.
Okay, thank you. What we received today was a draft report, and gives the staff a chance for a heads up, and they'll be looking at it over the next 30-some days. And then in January, we'd love to have you back with a final report, or as soon as you can thereafter with a final report, whatever it takes. And then we'll take that report and we will give it to our staff for a formal response, and how they can respond to the 16 recommendations and what they think should be done. And your recommendations will be incorporated along with the staff's ideas with the assessment, the management assessment, which is ongoing. So you're going to impact the budget discussion for the next year and many, many years thereafter. I want to thank Dr. Rozelle for her efforts, and I want to thank Jareen Watson, Paula Alardo. I think they were there for every meeting, and so you sacrificed your time on behalf of the city, ladies, and we certainly thank you for that, as we thank your staff. And then our fire chief and our police chief, and the assistants there too, and all their folks for your efforts on behalf of this committee meeting, and the city manager and his deputies for their involvement. So we thank everybody for that. But this presentation reflected a lot of homework. Not just the materials you've developed over the last several months, but just preparing to stand there was took some time. So we're very thankful for that. And over the long run, we're also thankful because you grasped a subject which to all of us is complex and difficult. You accepted the educational format we provided, and you certainly gave us something to work with, something that's very intelligent and will aid the city. And there's no doubt, Marv, this group that you're heading up right this minute, but I know there's no chair for this group, but all members, you're an exceptionally gifted group. So we're pleased to be in the same city with all of you. So thank you very much. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, sir.
We'll start up about 6:10 for our council meeting.